It all began with a promise of adventure, riches, and glory. In 401 BC, Greece was full of hardened soldiers left idle after the Peloponnesian War. These mercenaries, hungry for purpose and pay, soon heard a tempting offer from the east. Cyrus the Younger, a Persian prince, needed the best fighters to seize the throne from his brother, King Artaxerxes II. He sent agents to Greece, offering fortunes for a short campaign and easy victory. Thousands answered, gathering at Sardis. Veterans, exiles, and ambitious youths. Over 10,000 strong, they believed they were hired to quell a minor rebellion. Cyrus hid his true aim, to march against the great king himself, deep into Persia. The Greeks, lured by gold and trusting their commanders, prepared for the unknown. They polished armor, sharpened swords, and dreamed of returning home as heroes. Confident, perhaps arrogant, they believed no army could stand against them, but they had no idea of the journey ahead. They could not imagine the dangers, betrayals, or the epic struggle for survival that awaited. Their adventure was about to begin. The promise of gold and glory would soon be tested by reality. For these men, the march east was more than a job. It was a gamble with fate. They were about to become legends, though not in the way they expected. The story of the 10,000 was set in motion. The 10,000 marched east, a river of bronze and steel under the Anatolian sun. They crossed rivers, ancient cities, and vast Persian lands, further from home than ever before. Cyrus, charismatic and generous, kept them loyal with pay and praise. The Greeks believed they were fighting a rebel satrap, but unease grew as the journey dragged on. When they reached the Euphrates, Cyrus revealed the truth. They were marching on Babylon to challenge the great king himself. Shock and anger rippled through the ranks. They felt deceived and trapped. Facing impossible odds, Cyrus promised them even greater rewards and appealed to their pride. The lure of fortune and trust in Cyrus won out. They agreed to continue, spirits renewed. The Greeks crossed the river, marching toward destiny at Cunaxa. The stakes were now clear: victory or death, glory or oblivion. The march was no longer about pay, it was about survival and honor. The 10,000 pressed on, united by ambition and necessity. They had become more than mercenaries. They were an army with a cause. Every step brought them closer to a confrontation that would decide their fate. The road to Cunaxa was a point of no return. The Greeks braced themselves for the greatest test of their lives. Ahead lay the might of Persia and the unknown. The march east had become a march into legend. Their resolve would soon be put to the ultimate test. The day of battle dawned hot and hazy at Cunaxa. The Greeks formed a solid wall of bronze, facing the vast army of Artaxerxes. Persian cavalry, archers, and scythed chariots filled the plain, a terrifying sight. Yet the Greeks advanced steadily, singing their battle hymn. The Persians opposite them broke and fled before a single spear was thrown. The 10,000 had won their fight with discipline and courage. But elsewhere, disaster struck. Cyrus, in a reckless charge, was killed in the chaos. The news spread slowly. Disbelief turned to horror. Their leader, their purpose, was gone. Victory became meaningless. The cheers died. The Greeks were stranded, a tiny force deep in hostile territory. Their triumph had become a trap. The real battle was now for survival, not conquest. The 10,000 faced a new reality, alone, surrounded, and leadless. The promise of gold was replaced by the fear of annihilation. Their greatest challenge was just beginning. The Battle of Cunaxa was over, but the true ordeal had only started. The Greeks would have to fight not for Cyrus, but for their own lives. The march home would be their greatest test. After the battle, a tense calm settled. The Greeks had won, but lost their leader. Artaxerxes had lost the fight, but kept his throne. Unable to defeat the Greeks in battle, the king turned to deception. He offered a truce and safe passage, sending Tissaphernes as a guide. The Greeks, desperate and low on supplies, reluctantly agreed. For days, hope flickered as Persians supplied food and led them north, but it was a trap. Tissaphernes invited the Greek generals, led by Clearchus, to a friendly meeting. Once inside the Persian camp, the generals were seized and executed. The Greek army, left leaderless, was thrown into chaos and despair. The truce was a lie, betrayal complete. Panic swept the camp as the truth emerged. The Greeks were now alone, surrounded and without command. It was their darkest hour. Many believed the end had come. The Persians had struck not with swords, but with treachery. The 10,000 faced annihilation or a desperate fight for survival. The betrayal of the generals would force new leaders to rise. The fate of the army hung in the balance. In the chaos, a new leader emerged, Xenophon, an Athenian gentleman and student of Socrates. He was no professional soldier, but in crisis he could not stand by. A dream spurred him to action. He saw it as a sign from the gods. Xenophon rallied the junior officers, urging immediate action and new leadership. He argued that only by marching could they survive. His conviction inspired the officers and soldiers alike. The next morning, Xenophon addressed the army, reminding them of their heritage and the favor of the gods. He laid out a planned travel light, elect new generals, and fight their way home. The soldiers, desperate for hope, elected Xenophon as one of their leaders. A philosopher had become a commander. Under his guidance, the 10,000 found new purpose. They were no longer lost mercenaries, but an army with a mission. Xenophon's leadership transformed despair into resolve. The march home would be led by courage and intellect. The 10,000 were ready to fight for survival. With new leaders and hope, the 10,000 began their epic march north. Xenophon quickly adapted their tactics, forming the army into a hollow square for protection. Persian cavalry and archers harassed them, but the Greeks held firm. Xenophon recruited Rhodian slingers and formed a small cavalry to counter enemy skirmishers. The Greeks evolved, turning the enemy's tactics against them. Every day was a battle, marching by day, fortifying camp by night. Food was scarce. They fought for every scrap and foraged constantly. Tissaphernes' forces stalked them relentlessly, but discipline held. The Greeks became a moving fortress, resilient and united. Their retreat was a masterclass in survival and adaptation. The march north was a relentless test of endurance. The 10,000 refused to break, led by Xenophon's ingenuity. They were no longer just mercenaries, they were legends in the making. Their fighting retreat would echo through history. Leaving the Persians behind, the Greeks faced a new enemy, the mountains of Kurdistan and Armenia. The terrain was brutal, the Carduchian tribes fierce and elusive. Ambushes from above, rolling boulders and arrows made every step deadly. 7 days in the Carduchian mountains cost more lives than any battle. Emerging into Armenia, they met a new foe, winter. Snow, bitter cold, and starvation ravaged the army. Many suffered frostbite, shoes fell apart, men collapsed in the snow. Xenophon pushed them onward, knowing to stop was to die. They raided villages for food, fighting for survival. The proud army was now a band of survivors, held together by will alone. They had faced betrayal, armies, and now nature itself. The struggle was relentless, but they pressed on. The mountains tested them as nothing else had. After the horrors of winter, the battered army marched north, driven by the hope of reaching the sea. The sea meant safety, home, and the end of their ordeal. One spring day, the vanguard reached the summit of Mount Thetches. There on the horizon they saw it, the Black Sea. A great shout erupted, "Thalata! Thalata! The sea! The sea!" Relief and joy swept the army. Men embraced, wept, and celebrated. They had survived against all odds. Xenophon described the scene as a moment of pure triumph. The soldiers built a cairn, a monument to their journey and the gods. The cry of Thalata became a symbol of hope and endurance. Though challenges remained, they knew they had won their war for survival. The sea was more than a destination, it was salvation. Their journey had become legend. The journey of the 10,000 did not end at the sea. They still faced hostile tribes and disputes before finding ships home. But the hardest part was over. The Anabasis was complete. Xenophon's account became a legend, inspiring future generations. The march proved that discipline and leadership could overcome impossible odds. It showed the weaknesses of Persia and the strength of Greek arms. The story inspired Alexander the Great's later conquest. More than a military tale, it's a timeless lesson in resilience and hope. The cry of Thalata still echoes as a symbol of triumph. The 10,000 remind us, even in the darkest wilderness, hope can lead us home.